Now, climate change hasn't come up in the presidential debates, but it almost did in the Republican National Convention when Mitt Romney went to the stage and he said, Barack Obama promised to slow the rise of the oceans. I don't know if Barack Obama, or rather Mitt Romney, was adopting some of the arguments I'm talking about today. It's the argument of humility. It's the argument that even if you know today, you don't know tomorrow, and knowing tomorrow, you don't even know what you can change. But I'd like to see that argument put forward by Mitt Romney, and honestly, guys, I'd like to see this argument put forward in lieu of the hoax argument, which has got some truth to it as well, that the science that they put forward is not all true. Buck?
Well, the costs of these kinds of miscalculations are actually quite severe, and it's not something that people talk about enough. When you look at, for example, DDT, a substance that there were folk songs written about how this was going to kill all the birds and poison all the rivers. It's actually not nearly as toxic as people said it was. But by the way, as a result of not using that, you've seen malaria growth around the world. Malaria is a real problem. Right. And by focusing on things like this, which are, you know, we can get into how real or how not real it is in a minute, but when you're focusing on this, you're not focusing on other things. There are costs here. It would be like all the energy and time spent on Y2K, the Y2K virus. People thought about that. What are we going to do? Oh, we're going to lose. We're going to be in the Stone Age. All the computers are going to... That was a consensus view among a lot of people who were technologically savvy. Completely false.
And that's the argument I was trying to make on Bill Maher on Friday, is that you're proposing a cure that may be worse than the disease. And Matt Ridley, who I quoted, said, it's like offering to tie a tourniquet around your neck because you have a nosebleed. Even if the climate is changing, we're talking about real laws that have real effect. Limiting fossil fuels, who have been responsible for that growth in agriculture and that growth in light and heat in every poor kid's home across this world, that's what you're imposing a cost on. Less of that.
Well, as a political matter, I think Mitt Romney, if he is skeptical of climate change, he's on the right side of this issue. Most of the American public does not want to bankrupt our economy for the sake of this theory that they're not exactly sold on. We've talked about it before, and interestingly, Gen X is actually the most skeptical of climate change, alarmism. But looking at it at the more sort of philosophical level, as you just did, the other part of this that was overlooked by Malthus and, say, energy scarcity alarmists is the interaction of price and quantity in the market. For example, with oil, it's a fossil fuel. It is finite, but as the less that we have, the price goes up. Those profits bring in people who are innovators who want to get into the energy market. Right. All of a sudden, solar and wind looks cheap by comparison. So it's not including the human element of this, of human innovation and energy.
But I don't want to be on the side of the alarmists, because I'm not. I'm on the far other side. But just to kind of play devil's advocate, sure. You're saying, let's not do anything right now because we don't know what the future holds. If we don't do something now, then all of a sudden, 20, 30, 40 years from now, that science that we're talking about is decades behind. So you almost have to do something now to prepare for what could happen in the future.
Matt, you're absolutely right, but it's a bit of a straw man, because no one is proposing we put blinders over our eyes. And that's the straw man that I think liberals use. Well, you don't want to do anything. No, that's not true. I think this is something that Bjorn Lomborg talks about as well. The problem is that we have identified a problem, and now we just throw money at it blindly. We don't ever ask, is it working? We don't ever ask, to what extent. We don't ask, what's going to change over time that might make this obsolete?
But just if I can,
throw money at it.
The cost of your solution. Yeah. That's the just-in-case argument response, right? You just put forward the just-in-case argument, right? But the just-in-case comes at a cost. In Malthus's day, that cost was eugenics. In Malthus's day, that cost was limiting birth. Today, it's limiting fossil fuel. And if you don't see the connection, and I'm not saying you do, Matt, I know you do, between fossil fuel, wealth, and poverty, you just don't see how the world works.
We're also decarbonizing naturally. I mean, that's already occurring. These technologies are getting better all the time. What the alarmists are talking about is a great leap forward. And they can't get it, by the way, through Congress because of the costs involved. So they're trying things like using the EPA.
And they want to spur innovation that Amy's talking about through a tax. And they want to force the innovation.
You don't have to be a scientist, and this is why you get a lot of imperious scientists that appear on TV and act like, well, you can't understand these numbers. You don't have to be a scientist to understand that consensus is not what science is about. It only takes one person to prove someone wrong, and the entire methodology of the climate alarmists is, we can't give you the data, you can't replicate these experiments, and if you disagree with us, you're an idiot. That's literally the argument.
It's disturbing the way they ostracize the heretic. You talked about the consensus, and it's always put forward. There are no legitimate scientists who disagree with the idea that man is causing climate change. It's not true. They've just been completely made fun of.
What's so strange?
Bjorn Lomborg is a great example.
What's so strange is that for all of this sort of fetishizing of the scientific process, asking questions. The second you question climate change,
Right.
you are somehow
it's anti-scientific.
a Neanderthal.
The fact that they won't allow it should always be a testing of assumptions over and over again. These experiments, you should be able to replicate them. The data should be public. We should know. And do you ever see, by the way, when they're doing cancer research for drugs, do you see scientists finagling the numbers? Oh, we're just going to pretend that this doesn't have the side effects that it does.
Important.
No, people will be outraged. But with the East Anglia ClimateGate emails, people act like, well, that just happens sometimes.